said, illegal migration into the US poses a great threat to national security. Prime Minister Trudeau says our immigration system is robust and secure. He has pledged $173 million towards helping border officials deal with this crisis. Conservatives are demanding Liberals act to halt this illegal border crossings. We are honored to have in our studio PCMP Shadow Minister for Citizenship and Immigration, Honorable Michelle Rampell.
Prosecutor makes, I'm assuming charges will be laid, obviously, but you know, the point that I agree with you on is that what the priority of the government should be is to make the world, like Canada, a safer place, not table legislation that's going to give potentially lighter sentences for things like terrorism-related charges, right?
So what is his motivation? It's very difficult for regular people like us to understand, you know, why a prime minister would not take the security of the people of this country seriously, right?
I don't want to get into Justin Trudeau's thoughts. You know, I don't want to put myself in his brain because I think that would be a very disconcerting place to be. I don't know what his motivation is for some of the things that he does, but I will say this. You know, I've watched him for the last few years, and you know, I think he's more concerned about his image and his brand and his ego rather than that public service component, right? Like when you are elected, you are a public servant, and that means you are here. Your purpose is to serve the people. The people come before you,
of course.
And I think that's why people reacted so strongly to his India trip, right?
Yes.
Because it was clearly about pictures and costumes, and you know, whereas that country has such a we have such an important relationship. You know, he wasn't there focused on trade. He wasn't there focused on building stronger ties. It was you know, the Taj Mahal costume picture, and like I couldn't believe, you know, I was just rolling my eyes, and I think that was a real moment where people were like, what are your priorities?
Yes.
Such a great question.
Yes.
But I can't answer that. I can't.
All right, so there is a question that you can answer.
Sure.
You aspire to be the next Minister of Immigration
Well,
and Citizenship. Under your leadership, what can the people of Canada look forward to?
Well, first of all, you know, I would, if your viewers don't know our leader, Andrew Scheer, they really should. He's a very humble man. Like, so, you know, when we're sitting here talking about Trudeau's ego, Andrew Scheer is a very humble, servant-oriented person.
Yes.
And so to me,
like,
you know, when you're saying what do we aspire to, I think number one is putting the people of Canada first in the policies before ego or seeking power. And what does that look like in terms of immigration? We're starting to work on our election platform right now, but there's so many things that, you know, policies that we, you know, would certainly put forward to make sure that Canada remains a compassionate, caring place that welcomes people to Canada in a planned, orderly fashion. And that would be what I would say to you in terms of what we aspire to, is that under the Liberal government, it's been a reversal, right? It's chaos. And you know, somebody who is playing by the rules, who is trying to come to this country legally, sponsor their family, the system is almost rigged against them under Justin Trudeau.
That's
what
right.
I know our party leader and all of my colleagues would like to see is that we return to a planned, orderly, safe immigration system that prioritizes the world's most vulnerable in terms of our humanitarian assistance, does not allow people to, you know, make a mockery of our asylum claim system by flooding across the border illegally, and that we, you know, we're ensuring that the other streams of immigration that we have work, and that we also have a plan to ensure that people integrate and have the most successful experience in Canada that they can have, right? It's not enough just to, you know, it's not enough for just to take pictures of refugees when they're coming to the airport and then saying, bye, I'm done with you now, right? That's not good government. And I know that the policies that we'll be announcing, you know, over the next year and a half, I think are really going to inspire new Canadians and, you know, those who aspire to be new Canadians alike.
All right. Under the Conservative government, what can people expect to see in terms of refugees coming? Because there are so many
Sure.
refugees. There are some real refugees, and then there's some who are not real refugees but are coming to Western countries. There are lots of refugees who are truly being persecuted. In the Middle East, in countries like Pakistan. I'm talking minorities like the Christians, the Yazidis, and smaller groups of people who are very dire need of help.
Yep.
We haven't seen too many Christian people, too many Yazidis or people like that come as refugees. And what can people, this is one of the big concerns that people have, is
sure.
because they're suffering so much.
And I want to be clear. I mean, the migrant crisis in the Middle East affects all people. I mean, you look at Syria and parts of Iraq that have suffered under ISIS, and your heart breaks, right? The Rohingya crisis. I mean, there are so many people on the move and in need. So what I would say in terms of a conservative vision is that we remain, as we once were, a very compassionate country. I would point to there's a program called the Private Sponsor Refugee Program, or the PSR program, and that's where groups of Canadians raise funds to bring people to Canada that have been identified as refugees. I'd like to see that program expanded. Right now there's a 45,000 case backlog of privately sponsored refugees. So can you imagine that? You've got all these people illegally coming into the country. People have raised funds to help the world's most vulnerable. To me, that needs to be immediately rectified. I would like to ensure that when somebody comes to this country as a refugee, and everybody's going to have different needs, but that integration is something, that successful experience in the country, that self-reliance, that's something that we're building into our refugee programs as well, in terms of the integration supports through resettlement that we're planning for. And then, to your question about persecuted minority groups, I think it is absolutely fair to ask, how is it possible that we took in nearly 30,000 refugees from Syria and northern Iraq under this Liberal government, and none of them were Yazidi?
Yes.
Like, these are people, for your viewers who aren't familiar, they're a persecuted ethnic minority group in Iraq. They underwent a genocide. Tens of thousands of their women were sold into sexual slavery. And how is it that zero were from this group? So this is where we've been pushing to make sure that the world's most vulnerable are included in our programs. I would like to see that sort of a philosophy certainly emphasized, where that's something that the Liberals have absolutely failed. And I think that Canada can assert its world position with groups like the UNHCR, and ensuring that when they are selecting refugees, that groups that can't make it to a UN refugee camp are very persecuted, aren't ignored. And so you raise a good point. I mean, we have to make sure that we have criteria that are common sense and understandable and compassionate when we're selecting refugees, and they're consistently applied, so it doesn't become a political minefield, or that we're bringing people to the country for political reasons. It should be for compassionate reasons. But when we're failing groups that are legitimately persecuted the way that we did, like the way that the Liberal government did with the Yazidi genocide, you have to look to fix the problem, and that's something I know that my party would do if we were in government. Because,
as you mentioned, the problem is that these groups who are most vulnerable don't get to reach the UNHCR camps.
Well, that was a big problem. Again, we could use other groups, but the Yazidis were a great example of that. We had members of the Yazidi community in front of my parliamentary committee on many occasions, where they talked about, if we get to a UN camp, if we somehow make it there, we are often persecuted by the ethnic majority that are in these camps, and it's not safe. So you can't just, we can't ignore that. That is something that we have to fix. And the other thing too is that, resettlement is only one way to respond to a humanitarian crisis, right? You also have to look at, okay, how are we providing aid? Are there political solutions that we have to be pressing for as well, like the Rohingya crisis, right?
Right.
These are people who have been rendered stateless because they don't have citizenship. What is the international community doing, and what is Canada doing to address that situation? So oftentimes, you know, what I found Justin Trudeau has done is just look at resettlement from a very narrow view, right? You know, Justin Trudeau pulled our airplanes out of the fight to contain ISIS, right? It's also what is Canada's role internationally in ensuring that there's peace and stability in regions.
So then don't people have to become refugees?
Well, but it's more than that. Like, I think,
Yes.
like, while obviously Canada is a wonderful place that many people want to come to,
Yes.
I can't imagine having to leave my home. My first instinct would be, I want to stay in my home.
Exactly.
And so for a lot of people, if their only option is to leave, that's not necessarily what they want to do. And in some ways, like, again, going back to the Yazidis, these are people who have been indigenous to that part of Iraq for millennia.
Yes.
And removing them from their homeland is completing a genocide. So while we have to protect them and give them safe haven, we're actually losing part of the conversation if we're only focusing on resettlement. And again, that's something you don't hear out of the Trudeau Liberals, is that broader foreign policy approach.
So your approach would be more comprehensive?
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely, as it always has been.
Inclusive, and we're not saying that it should only be focused on a certain group of people, but the ones who are most vulnerable. The reason why I mention Yazidis and the Christians is because they are most vulnerable.
They're very vulnerable in those areas.
So we are told there are close to 100 million people. Some of them may be experiencing harsh persecution, but some may not be as much. We're not talking so much about them, but people who are really at a brink of extinction in some areas.
Yes.
Right? So those are the ones that we need to have a policy or a way of identifying first and bringing them, because if you just leave them wherever they are, like the Yazidis went on top of the mountain, no, hoping that somebody would just find them. You know, over there.
To be clear, like there are so many people in need around the world. I mean, migration is one of the I would argue it's probably the most pressing global public policy concern right now. I mean, I spent some time in the European Union this year. Certainly, Europe is seized with this. The United States is seized with this, and you know, we can react in one of two ways, right? You can react and say, we don't want immigration. And I don't want that narrative. I don't want to talk about that. I want to make sure that we stay open and welcoming. But if you don't have a plan and you don't look at, you know, it's reasonable to talk about things like, how do we prioritize people who are coming into this country, right? What is the difference between somebody who is coming into this country because they're looking for better employment versus somebody who is persecuted? And I think sometimes over the last couple of years, especially as, you know, things like the UN Global Compact for Migration, all of these sorts of documents are being developed, we can't lose that narrative, right? And it's the same thing for the border crossing crisis in Canada right now. These are people who have reached the United States of America. They are in a safe country, right? This is why we actually have a legal agreement called the Safe Third Country Agreement. So to say we should be spending hundreds of millions of dollars to prioritize people that are already in a safe country, that are illegally crossing the border, whereas there are so many people that are in need around the world. Like it's just, it doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense.
That's right.
And to me, that's really where this government has gone off the rails, is that they really don't have a plan. I know for a fact they're letting the bureaucracy, unelected public servants make all of this policy because they're lazy, right? Yeah. And they don't want to use the political will required.
They have to be debated in the House of Commons.
I agree.
Yes, because there's a reason why we send our representatives, because people there's a reason for that. And so they have to be debated, and public has to be involved in that conversation. And as you mentioned, Canadians are generous. You know, we love, we want to help, right? But we have to have a program that is not only a comprehensive program, but also sustainable.
Yep.
I think the biggest concern that a lot of people have is that if we continue on this path, this path is not sustainable, and it's going to lead to other problems down the road.
It is, and that's where, you know, you're right. We have to have tougher conversations about global policy, right?
Yeah.
You know, how do you deal with countries that are, you know, running oppressive theocratic regimes when they're, you know, gassing their own people, right? Like, how do you deal with the agents that are causing migration, right? Be it like a state actor or other, you know, other influences. There's a broader, tougher conversation that the world needs to have. And right now, to your point, I feel like we're not having that concept about sustainability. I don't want people forced from their homes.
No, absolutely not. Because not everybody wants to leave.
And when somebody wants to come to this country and is proud to do that, I want to make sure that we have a legal, safe, orderly, and fair system for them to do that. We already have so many programs that people can apply to come to Canada as an economic immigrant.
Right.
And those programs are now backlogged years and years and years because, you know, Trudeau is having to shift processing agents from other lines of immigration services to processing people who are illegally entering the country. Right. And to me, that's wrong.
Yeah, so the danger is that it's going to lead to unsustainability because our system will not be able to sustain it long term. So I'm glad that you have a comprehensive program. We look forward to implementation of some of these programs when you come to power as our new
under Prime Minister Andrew Scheer. It has a nice ring to it.
All right. Well,
yes.
Andrew Scheer is a great candidate to be our Prime Minister. And we have met him. He's been a guest also on the show. And yes, I totally agree with you that this is going to be something that all Canadians can look forward to, right? So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure and an honor.
Yes, please come back again.
Thank you.
You don't go anywhere. We have lots more for you.